Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about the visuals in Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. But in order to do that, we need to take a look at the original Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Nintendo Wii U, a game that came out back in 2015. And so in preparation for this video, I fired up my Wii U, I started playing Xenoblade Chronicles X, recording the gameplay, and something became immediately apparent to me as I was playing through this game. Even though this game was made for the Wii U, a console that's essentially about as powerful as the Switch, a little bit weaker, after all these years, nearly 10 years later, on hardware that was already struggling back then, I am absolutely blown away by what I see with Xenoblade Chronicles X. Xenoblade Chronicles X has a massive open world. There aren't really any other games on Nintendo that compare. Sure, there are some open world experiences, but the open world experience in Xenoblade Chronicles X is several times larger than most. You can literally go everywhere, and the variety of the environments is incredible. The vistas, the effects in the skies between the sunlights and the auroras. The wildlife of Planet Mira is both exotic and beautiful. But perhaps what blows me away the most is the sense of scale. For the first several hours of Xenoblade Chronicles X, you play as just a humanoid character, and you can sprint and jump around with some incredible athleticism, which allows you to explore quite a bit of this environment with incredible topography. But once you get to the point where you unlock the Skells, those mechanical dolls, the game truly opens up because you can fly around, and in these dolls you reach a much larger stature, and yet despite that, there are still creatures that are far larger than you. The environment still feel oh so massive. You can fly so high up, so far out into the seas. There is so much to explore. Literally every single point there is, you can touch. And so the entire visual experience for Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U still blows me away to this day, even when I think about it in comparison to other impressive Switch games, including the other Xenoblade games we've gotten on the console. And so with that in mind, I start to think about the kinds of improvements we could see for the Switch version of this game. Before this game was announced, there was a lot of debate and speculation that maybe we would see this come to Nintendo Switch 2, because when looking at the first definitive edition for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, there were massive improvements on that definitive edition. Of course, it was for a console that was substantially more powerful, jumping from the Nintendo Wii all the way to the Nintendo Switch. But this time around, we're seeing a definitive edition for Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Switch, which is only marginally more powerful than the Wii U. The jury's still out on if there will be a Switch 2 version as well, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Nintendo's already confirmed to us that there will be visual enhancements. So what can we expect to see? Well, the different Xenoblade games on the Switch have seen different improvements. Starting with Xenoblade Chronicles 2, we were already starting to see a lot more variety to the materials. And what Monosoft did with those cloud effects, apparently not many other devs can simulate. But then as they progressed with Torn of the Golden Country, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Future Redeemed, we continue to see more improvements to the lighting and shadow effects, how they handle their dynamic resolution, anti-aliasing, and so all these different effects started to come together, and Xenoblade games have continued to improve from a visual perspective over the years, even on the same piece of hardware that is a Switch. So I start to get excited thinking about how some of these improvements might be incorporated into Xenoblade Chronicles X, even though the power of the hardware is just a small minor jump here. But going beyond just straight up graphical improvements, I also am expecting improvements to the HUD and the UI as well. This is a definitive edition after all, and when looking at those changes we saw for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, they certainly improved the overall experience. It was easier to navigate around and see what was going on. The lock-on system was a lot more pronounced. And while we haven't quite seen too much evidence of that yet, I think it's clear that they're hiding those elements currently. Xenoblade Chronicles X certainly stands to improve tremendously in this regard. I remember playing the original experience back on Wii U, and there was definitely an issue of the font size. It was extremely small and hard to read. So here's hoping that they improve on that. But then also we should take into consideration that they're going to have to make some massive changes because Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U was a dual screen experience. The Switch is only one. So how are they going to handle that and make it feel like an improved experience? I'm sure it's going to be a challenge, but there are some obvious things that they can improve on, as I just mentioned with the font. And before going forward here, let me just briefly ask that if you've gotten to this point and you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. But let's now start getting into some comparisons here. When I saw the trailer the very first time, there were two changes that I noticed. The most obvious are the faces. Very much similar to how they made this drastic change with the first Definitive Edition. The faces, the designs are literally different. The designs are more in line with modern Xenoblade games, but they also look tremendously better. The first two Xenoblade games were almost about to create an odd tradition here where there's just always something wrong with the faces of the characters. With Xenoblade Chronicles 1 back on the Wii, because they were putting out these amazing visuals with these large sprawling environments for such weak hardware, concessions needed to be made, and so the textures of the faces of the characters back on Xenoblade 1 and Wii were, well, horrendous. And for Xenoblade Chronicles X, from a technical perspective, they weren't necessarily bad. The designs of them, many people found to be quite awkward. And I don't want to really spoil too much here, but there are some story elements that could perhaps explain away the awkwardness of how some of these characters look. But what they're doing with Definitive Edition, these faces look a lot better. Looking at Elma, looking at Cross, the default main character, or Lyn, the faces look dramatically different, and ultimately I'm going to say it's very much for the better. But the other obvious change I noticed was just the color of the game. The colors seem to be more vibrant and pronounced. Going back to playing Xenoblade Chronicles X in the Wii U, while there were certainly some parts that were very colorful, there was also a lot of other parts that are a little dull in comparison to what we're seeing in the trailer. And so those were the obvious changes, but upon closer inspection, I have noticed more. And perhaps this ties somewhat into the colors and how vibrant they look, but it definitely looks like to me they've been working on the lighting and shadow effects as well. Just looking at Elma's clothes here, they stand out a little bit. And part of it, I think that has to do with improved shadow effects. We can actually notice a little bit of ambient occlusion, which I don't think you really saw much of in the original version. But also, if you take a look here, and you see these two different shots, the Wii U version and the Switch version, you'll notice that you don't see as many of those zigzagly or pixely looking lines. And that's essentially anti-aliasing. Modern Xenoblade games sport anti-aliasing, and it does improve the overall visual experience, and we can see a bit of that here. Moving on to the space scene, if you take a close look, you'll see there's a difference in the outline of the shadows. In the Definitive Edition, it looks more natural. Between the anti-aliasing, these vibrant colors, and these more natural lighting and shadow effects, I think we are seeing some noticeable differences here. But there are more. Let's take a quick look at these two different shots of the cat in one of the opening scenes to the game. One is the color of the cat. The Definitive Edition looks more vibrant, but also the overall texture quality is a little bit more clear in Definitive Edition. When you look at the floor, when you look at the wall, in the original, it's clearly a bit more blurred. But coming back to the cat and focusing on the model, notice the tail. The tail in the original is a bit more blocky. So it looks like they may have improved on that a little bit there, even though still the cat looks a bit blocky overall. But something else that I noticed, it was actually rather subtle, is that the whiskers look a lot more realistic and natural in the Definitive Edition compared to just these random lines they decided to plop on the old version. And so that has me wondering on just different whiskers we might see for different characters, because there are a lot of animal-like characters in this game, and perhaps that even extends to just hair overall. Something I've seen brought up in regards to the hair for Elma is that it doesn't move around as much as it did in the original. But it has seemed that the back of her hair is still moving naturally, just not on the front. I wonder if this is an intentional choice, just so we don't see as much clipping, so it doesn't take away too much from our suspension of disbelief, because it's always weird to me when I see like hair or clothes clip into each other. We don't really see too much of that in the Definitive Edition. So overall, I'm gonna argue that that's also an improvement. But while we have seen some clear improvements already, there are also some oddities. As we take a look at some of these city shots here, we can get an idea of how this game streams in its level of detail. In the original Xenoblade Chronicles X, when you take a look at these palm trees, you can see they're more detailed up front, but a little bit further back, they're kind of flat. This is still the case in Definitive Edition for Nintendo Switch. And also, during this early scene, when we see them panning around the city, you can see the textures of the road disappear. This still happens in the trailer, and it's not even that far away. Now, we still have seen some improvements with Definitive Edition. As you can see in these shots here, the trees are still apparent in Definitive Edition, but not the original. And as we see this panning shot rotating around the city, we don't see as much pop-in the newer version. But it's still there to some extent, even in this trailer that is of a cutscene in the game. And another weird thing I noticed, when taking a look at the original, there was this weird little effect I noticed as Elma and your character are moving into the sunlight. You see almost like this glow extending out from the gun, and it looks kind of unnatural. This little oddity we see in the original is also in the trailer as well. So there are definitely still some weird little things and issues that are apparent in Definitive Edition. And it does have me wondering, can there be a Switch 2 version? We are unsure when Nintendo Switch 2 is coming out next year. There were initially reports this year that we'd be seeing it in March of next year. It doesn't seem like that's the case currently because we're already in November, they've yet to reveal the console, and now we have a game like Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition slated for March 20th of 2025. So it seems likely that the Switch 2 is coming out afterwards. How much afterwards remains to be seen. It might be just a month or two, it could be until later into the year closer to the holidays. But regardless of when we see Switch 2 come out, I still think there's a possibility they might want to have an improved version of Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition for Switch 2. And when considering the different oddities I just described, there's plenty of room for improvement here. Better level of detail, less pop-in, and also improved resolution. Which, by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but Xenoblade Chronicles X on Wii U looks pretty sharp in comparison to Xenoblade games on Nintendo Switch. And from what people are seeing of the new trailer, I'm personally unsure of this, but some people are thinking that the game might have been improved to a 1080p versus 720 we saw on Wii U. Either way, the original version is looking to have an even sharper resolution, and Switch 2 could perhaps have an even sharper one. And we could even see even more substantial improvements to a Switch 2 version, perhaps with like ray tracing effects as well. But either way, Xenoblade Chronicles X, even on the Wii U, looks amazing, and I'm excited to see how this game will improve with its Definitive Edition. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.